Today I'm going to continue with the construction, well, really painting and then installation of HMS Hood's boats. I'll be installing the 16-foot fast motorboat and then the three 25-foot fast motorboats. I am using resin 3D printed parts from MicroMaster for all of the ship's boats. As such, the first step in installation is the same for all of them. That is to remove these small little pieces of resin that were used during printing to hold up sections of the boat, and once those supports are removed, to then remove the boat from its base. For the 16-foot boats, they come in one piece, and I have 4 copies of them. However, I only need one. The layout of the boats in this area of the ship on HMS Hood is asymmetrical, so I have a lot of spares on this one. After the 16-foot motorboat is successfully removed from its base, use some sandpaper to smooth out the bottom of the hull. This just removes these little bumps where the support struts were connected to the side of the hull. For all of the boats on this model, I'm going to be using at least what I interpret to be the paint scheme as described by the HMS Hood Association. Having said that, it's not entirely clear to me exactly how these boats should be painted, so I'm giving it my best attempt. I'm following the same process for painting all of these boats. I start with the layer that's low inside the hull and then work my way up and out. All of these boats are going to be painted in the same scheme. That is, they'll have reddish brown wood with a white interior and then a blue hull and a white cabin. Since the decking inside the hull is the low point, I'm going to start by painting those first. The paint that I'm using here is Tamiya XF64 Red Brown. After masking off the reddish brown sections of deck, I then spray the interior of the hull in XF78 Wooden Deck Tan. This is the color that I'm using to represent raw wood on HMS Hood, including the interior parts of these boats. Once the XF78 has dried, more masking tape is applied to mask off the sections of raw wood, then the interior is sprayed in XF2 white. Once the white paint has dried, I use a brush to apply more XF64 to the deck at the top of the hull. Due to this being a very small area, I was unable to cleanly get the paint on, and a little bit of it lapped up onto the side of the cabin. I'm not happy with that, so I mask off the top of the deck and then respray the cabin in XF2. That gives a much cleaner line between the deck and the cabin. The last detail for the interior of the ship is to paint the chrome metal components. Here I don't have any chrome paint, so I'm going to use XF16. This is flat aluminium. If I was painting a larger area, then it would be much more important to have a chrome colored paint. But with this area, it's so small, anything that looks silvery I think will be suitable. Now that the interior is complete, I can move on to painting the exterior hull. From what I understand of the HMS Hood Association's painting guide, these boats should have a navy blue hull. Now, I don't have navy blue, but I do have this blue. But what's going to happen is after I've applied all this blue, I'm going to apply black panel line to it, which is going to darken it more. And I think having these lines of black inside blue is going to make it look like navy blue. If I put on navy blue directly, I think it would be too dark. So I'm going to simply mask off the cabin and paint the whole hull in XF8 flat blue. Also, according to the HMS Hood Association, the bottom of these boats' hulls is supposed to be white, so I mask off the top of the hull and then spray the bottom with XF2. The 16-foot fast motorboat is now ready for weathering, so I'll set that aside and work on the 25-foot motorboats. The 25-foot motorboats are quite a lot more elaborate. They have 2 cabins, and these enclosures are going to make things considerably more difficult to paint. But before I get onto that, I have to do the standard first process, which is to remove the resin support struts. I just pull these off with tweezers and a knife. Once again, I have been provided with 4 of these boats. However, in this case, I only need 3. So I have that one spare that I'll just leave on its base. But the other 3 are removed from the base and then prepared for painting. As before, there are some bumps between the bottom of the hull and the attachment points for the base, which requires a bit of a touch-up with sandpaper. Once I'm happy with the state of the hull, the painting process begins. Once again, starting inside at the lowest level, I paint everything with XF64 Red Brown. following which I mask off the interior raw wood parts of the boat and then spray it with XF78 wooden deck tan. Once that paint is dried, yet more masking tape is applied to the sections of raw wood deck, and then the interior is painted with XF2 white. Doing all this masking in very constrained spaces with cabins and stuff that I have to get inside is quite tricky. It would be so much nicer if the cabin could be removed. If these parts were printed in two parts, a cabin and a hull that I could then just glue together, it would have made this so much easier. But I think I'm managing. It's not ideal, but it works. After the white paint is dried, as with the 16-foot motorboat, I use a brush to paint more XF64 onto the deck at the top of the hull. And once again, some of that XF64 gets onto the side of the cabin, which then means that the deck needs to be masked off and the cabin needs to be repainted with XF2. Some spray got underneath the masking tape, and that required further touch-up of the deck with more XF64. Since none of that overspray got too close to the cabin, all of that touch-up was very easy. These boats also have a whole lot of chrome metal components on them. These rails on the roof and then the windows are all supposed to be chrome. So once again, I paint them by brush with XF16 flat aluminium. After giving the interior and the cabin some time to dry, I then move on to painting the hull. These hulls will also be painted in blue. They're also supposed to be navy. For these boats, I'll also be relying on those lines on the side of the hull to be filled with black panel line to have that darkening effect to make it look more like a navy blue. After leaving the upper hull to dry for a bit, I mask it off and then I spray the bottom of the hull with XF2. All of the boats are now painted and ready for weathering. As always, the first step for weathering is to spray everything with a clear gloss coat. This is Mr. Color GX112, a UV cut super clear gloss. After giving the gloss coat some time to dry, very thin panel line is then applied. This is black panel line thinned roughly 2 to 3 parts solvent to 1 part of panel line. The very thin panel line and the gloss coat will make it much easier for the panel line to flow to the details and leave a lot less residue to remove once it has dried. After the panel line has been left to dry for around 20 minutes, the excess is removed using solvent. After the solvent has fully evaporated, everything is sealed in using XF86 flat clear. These boats would typically be quite glossy in reality, but because of the scale effect, I'm using a matte paint to tone them down. Having the boats very glossy at this scale would make them look quite off. In the previous video, when it came to installing the cradles for the boats, it was quite easy because I was installing them on the wooden deck where there are markings for where the cradles should be positioned. So it was trivial to do, just put them in the markings and make sure everything was straight. Here it's going to be a little bit more difficult because there are no markings. There used to be plastic cradles molded into the deck, but those have long since been removed. There's absolutely no trace of where they used to be. So I have to now reposition these cradles by hand. Before starting the installation process, I place one of the boats on the deck to try and get a feel of where it should go. And I also use masking tape as width indicators to help me keep the spacing between the outer cradles to be equal. Once I'm happy with the position where the cradle should be installed, I place a piece of appropriate width masking tape on the deck to help me keep everything in alignment. With the masking tape in place, the 2 outer cradles are installed and a piece of brass wire is placed in a notch that runs in the center of the cradles. That's to help me align the center of these cradles to ensure that it is parallel to the midline of the ship. Any adjustments that need to be made to the outer cradles are then made while the superglue is still fairly wet. Once I'm happy with the orientation of the 2 outer cradles, I then install the inner cradle. Here, the inner cradle once again needs to be in alignment with the outer cradles. This is where that brass wire can once again be very helpful in ensuring that everything is straight. Once I'm happy with the position of all of the cradles that had been lightly tacked in place with extra thick superglue, I reinforce the bonds using extra thin superglue. This process is then repeated for the second 25-foot motorboat. First, I place down a piece of tape, then I place the outer cradles. I then use a piece of wire to ensure that the center line of the cradles is running parallel to the midline of the ship, after which I remove the tape, then install the third cradle, and once again use the brass wire to ensure that it is in alignment with the two outer cradles. Once I'm happy with the position of all of the cradles, I reinforce the bond using extra thin superglue that I apply with a wire. That completes the installation of the boats on the port side of the ship, and now I need to repeat the process on the starboard side of the ship. First, I install the last of the 25-foot motorboats using the same process, and then I move on to the installation of the single 16-foot motorboat. Being a considerably smaller boat, it only has 2 cradles. That makes things just a little bit easier because I don't have to worry about aligning the center cradle. Since the gap between the cradles for this motorboat needs to be narrower, I then choose a narrower piece of tape. This is 6mm tape. Once again, I place the tape on the deck and then move it around with the boat until I get it into a position that I'm happy with. Once I'm happy with the tape's position, I glue down the cradles using the same process as before. And with that, the installation of another 4 boats is completed. In the next video, I'm going to continue with the installation of the boats. However, I will only be installing 3. However, these are the 3 most complicated boats. That will be the 50-foot steam pinnace, the 35-foot fast motorboat, and the 35-foot admiral's barge. If you would like to support this channel or see how the ship looks when it is completed, then please subscribe. Thanks for watching. Cheers.